There's a common saying that only truly madmen engage in mixed martial arts, but that's mostly and demonstrably untrue. Most professional fighters are quite reasonable individuals and consistently treat their opponents with genuine respect, but the crucial keyword here is most. Here are just the top 5 craziest fighters in MMA. 5th place. Lionheart, Nightmare, a Dream, or simply Diego Sanchez. He is the living embodiment of unprovoked aggression and wild actions. Although everyone knows Diego as a brutal brawler at the start of his, but with this approach, he even made it to a title fight against BJ Penn, who of course easily ran through Sanchez. And that was the turning point when Diego completely changed and, as many believe, became a brawler from the sticks. His behavior before every fight immediately gives him away. The pompous grimaces, the awkward psychological pressure on his opponent, all of this happens during the stare-downs before the Mexican's fights. His opponents are always left puzzled because Diego acts and talks as if he has something wrong with his head. Whether he does this on purpose or it's the result of the massive amount of damage he's taken over his career is hard to say. And his entrances with a cross and shouts of "yes" made an even stranger impression on the audience. However, the change in style had a very positive effect on his earnings. He started receiving significantly higher fees, and even a large number of losses didn't raise the question of his dismissal, because even when Sanchez loses, he does it in a very spectacular way. But when he wins, it's usually less entertaining. For a while, he somehow managed to win fights that he was clearly losing. It started to look ridiculous. If Sanchez's fight went to a decision, his opponents were already prepared to lose, even if they had won every round. It became clear that the only way to beat Sanchez was to knock him out, otherwise, you couldn't win. And that's exactly what happened when Diego started losing by knockout in almost every one of his fights. But he found a successor in Mike Perry, whose behavior is obviously similar. Recently, they even started to become friends, and Diego is a real role model for Perry. But even despite all the controversy surrounding this character, his individuality is hard to miss. That's why he takes 5th place in our ranking. 4th place in this spot is a Russian fighter that you definitely wouldn't be truly proud of in any way. Vyacheslav Datsik is known to everyone for his outrageous behavior. But it started in his childhood, because even then he began to show aggression toward his peers and was even beaten up by his classmates. Several times he ended up in the hospital with concussions, which inevitably affected the child's psyche. In retaliation, Datsik would get into fights even with older students, fiercely biting them. He even tore the neck triceps of one of them. After that, he was put on record with the police. It was obvious that Vyacheslav showed no intellectual abilities, so all that was left for him was to go into combat sports. He started this back in his teenage years. His technique was astonishing. He could spend most of the round doing nothing, but then suddenly land a blow and knock out his opponent. But still, he was not considered the best fighter and lost fights repeatedly. The Red Tarzan, as he was nicknamed, stood out in the ring for his unconventionality and eccentricity. This made it very difficult for him to fight because he would easily lose his temper and could start behaving inappropriately. Very often, Datsik was warned for illegal moves or even disqualified. Because of his uncontrollable aggression, the Red Tarzan often argued with referees and beat up his opponents. There are several well-known cases where Vyacheslav hit a referee and smashed his opponent's head against the wall. The fighter's best weapon was his head. He considered it his strongest asset and would always lead with his head when attacking. His first professional victory was against Andrei Arlovsky, who dominated the entire fight, but accidentally took a punch to the jaw and lost to Datsik. After that, his career was unimpressive as he lost almost every fight, and when he did, he would hit his opponent in the groin and break the rules in every possible way to win, ultimately getting disqualified. It is worth noting Datsik's criminal past, as he led a criminal gang that robbed cell phone stores. They were responsible for around 50 stores. During police interrogation, he behaved inappropriately. He also confessed to many other assaults and robberies motivated by racism. For this, he received a prison sentence of 6 years. As a result, he ended up in a psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. At the moment, he is once again serving a prison sentence. Third place. If Sanchez is perhaps a bit crazy, but certainly not an evil character, then Jonathan Copenhaver, much better known as War Machine, is truly and utterly insane. Since childhood, he witnessed his parents fighting, saw his mother as a drug addict, and was surrounded by a bad environment on the streets. But he always loved to fight and wanted to make it his life. One of the people who introduced him to MMA was the legendary Ken Shamrock. As he said, he is ashamed that he helped him develop in this field. And Jonathan always put on a spectacular show for the fans and managed to earn some of their love. But he was extremely dissatisfied with his fee, so he moved into the porn industry, where he appeared in more than 10 projects. It was then that he met his future girlfriend and also porn actress Christy Mack. Then came a prison sentence for beating up club security guards. He also started an online blog, which he successfully ran straight from prison. Overall, the fighter had a significant amount of problems with the law due to his notoriously hot temper, so he felt quite at home in prison. But he eventually got out and after that promptly returned to fighting, had 4 intense matches, and subsequently launched his very own clothing brand with the bold slogan, "I do alpha male shit." But soon, Jonathan did something that put an end not only to his career and deprived us of new adult films with Christy, but also to the fighter's life as a whole. After breaking up with Christy Mack, he broke into her home and, finding her with a lover, began his assault. After driving the lover out, he spent 2 hours beating Christy, inflicting a huge number of fractures, about 18, and injuries, including a ruptured liver and spleen. As she later claimed, he wanted to kill her. For this, Bellator, where he was fighting at the time, immediately fired him, and he went on the run. But he didn't manage to stay on the run for long, and a few days later he was apprehended. Subsequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and he will not be eligible to apply for parole until he is 71 years old. When a journalist was once asked why Jonathan was imprisoned, his answer referenced a very well-known phrase on a t-shirt the fighter used to wear for doing alpha male shit. Second place. In recent years, Charles "Felony" Bennett has gained huge popularity in the CIS. He's become so well known here that he started calling himself an Afro-Russian. Thanks to old school combat, you probably know who he is too. But we simply can't leave this fighter unmentioned. Compared to many others in this ranking, Charles is a pretty harmless character, but that doesn't mean he's not crazy. Let's go back to the days when he was called Crazy Horse. He lived up to that nickname 100%. What else would you truly call someone who never really trained in martial arts, yet was already pulling off incredible things like this in just his second professional fight? But things could have turned out quite differently if Bennett had come from a normal, stable family. His parents were unfortunately addicted to drugs, and they had a total of 11 children. Charles understood that he needed to get moving and somehow make money, so he decided to sell drugs, which regularly landed him in jail. In a nutshell, that sums up Charles's entire career. Drug dealing, prison, fighting, and then the cycle repeats. It was exactly these elements that shaped his unconventional personality. His interviews are true works of art. I spent a lot of time in prison. You know, we didn't see it. Can you show it again? Prison. So, that means no women, jerking off every day, and the stare-downs with opponents, which are supposed to intimidate the other guy, just make everyone burst out laughing. And as for jumping onto the cage and ropes before the fight starts, you already know about that. But the displays of his vibrant personality don't end there. Just take the story of how, as a lightweight, he decided to pick a fight with light heavyweight Wanderlei Silva and his security team. To this day, Bennett claims that backstage he managed to knock out Wand. And stories like this constantly surround his persona. But despite the fact that Charles never won a single title, he still managed to fight many renowned fighters and champions. And facing him in the ring is far from a walk in the park. A vivid example is his fight at the time with the powerful prospect KJ Noons, who claimed he would knock Charles out without any trouble. And many people expected exactly that outcome. After all, KJ had a solid boxing background and power. By the way, he even defeated Nick Diaz at a time when Nick was on his truly legendary winning streak. Despite all the very real hype surrounding his opponent, Charles didn't really worry about it. As the underdog, he stepped into the fight and knocked Nunes out. And that's the essence of Charles Bennett. He's controversial, unpredictable, and that's exactly what makes him so interesting to everyone. That's why he takes second place in our ranking. First place. This ranking has featured fighters who are crazy in a good way and truly villainous characters, but Jason "Mayhem" Miller combined all the aspects of the previous fighters and added his own twist. Unlike all the other fighters in this ranking, Mayhem was never a brawler. On the contrary, all his crazy antics took place outside the octagon, while he himself was one of the most skilled grapplers of his time. He holds victories over such renowned fighters as Robbie Lawler, Kazushi Sakuraba, and Tim Kennedy. But to start a fight, you first have to make it to the cage. And in this, Miller has no equal. His creative entrances were remembered by many, especially the dance with Japanese schoolgirls. At one point, Miller was so incredibly popular that MTV created a special show specifically for him called Bully Beatdown, where Mayhem was the charismatic host. The fundamental premise of the show was that Jason would actively look for various bullies or even outright dangerous thugs and make a challenging bet with them. If they could beat him under MMA rules, he would give them $10,000, but if they lost, they would have to start behaving themselves. But as Jason climbed the career ladder and appeared on various popular shows, his personality began to change for the worse. The first warning sign was the Strikeforce tournament in Nashville, which we have a detailed video about on our channel. After successfully defending his title, Jake Shields was giving an interview when out of nowhere Mayhem jumped into the octagon and started shouting, "Where's my rematch?" He probably thought it was funny. But Jake and his team didn't see it that way. The Diaz brothers, Gilbert Melendez and Cesar Gracie, rushed at the poor guy and beat him up. Soon after the beating, Jason's interviews started getting stranger and stranger. One moment he would be talking to someone normally. In the middle of the interview, he might pull his pants down and then he might lunge at the journalist. But despite all these antics, he was signed by the UFC. In his very first fight, he was beaten by Michael Bisping. And after the Brit, Mayhem was defeated by CB Dollaway by decision. 2 losses in a row, and his erratic behavior became the reasons for his dismissal. After that, Jason fully lived up to his nickname, Scandal after Scandal. To his obvious mental disorders, he added an addiction to various drugs. Mayhem was repeatedly arrested, but each time the reasons for his arrest became more and more outrageous. At first, it was fights in public places and drunk driving, but over time it gradually escalated to brutally beating women, after which he then urinated on them. But the peak of Jason's madness was an incident in a church. Drunk and almost naked, he ran into a church, beat up the priest, urinated on him, and fell asleep. In 2016, a Mayhem comeback at middleweight was planned, but after years, his behavior hadn't changed. At the weigh-in, instead of the required 185 pounds, the scale showed 207 pounds. And he ultimately lost the fight since he was completely out of shape. Now Jason has calmed down somewhat, but years of extensive drug use have not only destroyed his voice and mind, but also his physical body. If you want a second part of Mad Fighters, let's get 15,000 likes. And in your opinion, which fighters are the craziest? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed our top list and are interested in MMA content, then hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon.